Okay, so, you've sent over some fascinating stuff about how we learn. And
Hmm.
one thing that really jumps out is this idea of cognitive load theory.
Yeah,
And I think it's worth sort of unpacking this right from the start.
right.
CLT is all about how our brains handle information when we're learning something new and complex,
Yeah.
particularly focusing on our working memory, that
Uh-huh.
kind of limited capacity, short-term holding space for information,
Right.
contrasted with our long-term memory, which is
Uh-huh.
like a vast library of, schemas and everything we've already learned.
Uh-huh.
And the core idea here is that effective learning has to really respect those limits of our working memory.
Absolutely. It's how do we sort of visualize this?
Well, think of it this way. It's like, you have a small glass and you're trying to pour a whole bunch of water into it.
Okay.
If you pour too much too quickly, it's going to spill over.
Right.
And, our working memory is kind of like that small glass when we're encountering new
Yeah.
information.
And CLT helps us understand the different kinds of mental effort
Mm-hmm.
involved in making sure we're filling that glass effectively.
Gotcha.
So we have things like intrinsic load,
Uh,
which is, the inherent difficulty of the material itself.
okay.
You can't, simplify calculus to teach somebody basic arithmetic.
Right, right, right.
So that's, you know,
Inherent, that's just the nature of the beast.
yeah, yeah.
Then you have extraneous load, which is like, having a leaky glass or cracked glass.
Okay.
It's the wasted mental effort caused by, you know, poor instruction or confusing materials,
Uh-huh.
things that don't actually help you understand the core concept. And then there's germane load,
Okay.
which is the mental effort that actually builds understanding, the
Mm.
stuff that helps you make those connections and store that information in your long-term memory,
Right.
like, upgrading to a bigger, more efficient glass over time.
Gotcha. So the mission of this deep dive, looking at all the research you've sent.
Yeah. Especially this special issue of Educational Psychology Review is to see how current thinking is kind of pushing the boundaries of CLT,
That's great.
both in terms of connecting it with fields that you might not immediately think of,
Right.
and also kind of digging deeper into its implications within, the field of educational psychology itself.
Exactly. It's a very dynamic field. And this collection of papers really showcases that,
Yeah.
they're not just accepting the foundational ideas of CLT.
Mm-hmm.
They're really asking, how does this fit into this broader understanding of cognition and learning?
Yeah.
And how can we apply these principles in more nuanced and effective ways?
Great. So let's start by looking at some of those connections with other fields.
Sure.
And evolutionary biology seems like a really fascinating starting point, especially with Sweller's work.
Yeah.
He's drawing some pretty interesting parallels between learning and the principles of natural selection.
Right. Very big picture stuff.
So tell me about that.
So what's fascinating about this is how Sweller looks at these, these fundamental mechanisms of evolution, and he sees echoes of them
Yeah.
in the way our cognition works.
Okay.
So he proposes these 5 key principles.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one is the idea of an information store,
Okay.
much like our long-term memory, which holds this vast amount of knowledge
Right.
accumulated over time right through experience and interactions.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have borrowing and reorganizing, which is, analogous to the way we take existing knowledge
Okay.
and we use it as a foundation to build new understanding.
Gotcha. So we're not building from scratch. We're always sort of,
Exactly.
piggybacking on what we've already got.
We're always leveraging what we already know to make sense of new things.
Okay.
Then there's this really interesting one. It's randomness as genesis.
Okay.
And this is the idea that new ideas and solutions can actually arise from sort of random combinations of what we already know.
So it's not all
Particularly linear when we're facing a novel situation.
Gotcha.
We don't have a clear path forward.
Mm-hmm.
So
Sometimes you got to shake things up a bit.
yeah, the classic example is, the inventor who has a dream
Oh, yeah.
and the solution to the problem just pops into their head.
Right.
Well, maybe it's not completely out of nowhere. Maybe it's the result of all this subconscious processing and random combinations of existing knowledge that's been going on.
Okay.
Then we have the narrow limits of change principle,
Okay.
which reflects the idea that both biological evolution and our cognitive structures change
Yeah.
incrementally,
So
small
over
steps
yeah.
over time.
Okay.
We don't have these huge leaps forward.
God.
It's a gradual process of adaptation and refinement. And finally, there's environmental organizing and linking,
Okay.
which emphasizes how the world around us shapes and guides our learning.
Right, right. It's
And
not
then-
just happening in a vacuum. It's always in response to.
The environment,
The context, the things we
So
encounter.
it's almost like our brains have evolved certain strategies for processing information
Mm-hmm.
that kind of mirror the very way life on Earth has evolved.
Right.
It's a pretty powerful way to think about it.
It is.
And this ties into uh, Geary's distinction between biologically primary and secondary knowledge,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
So Geary argues that we have this biologically primary knowledge,
Okay.
which are things that we're naturally equipped to learn almost effortlessly,
Okay.
over these vast evolutionary timescales,
Right.
like, understanding basic emotions or acquiring language things
Yeah.
that are kind of built in.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's secondary knowledge,
Okay.
which is much more recent in our evolutionary history.
So things that
That's like come along later.
yeah, writing advanced mathematics,
Gotcha.
these are things that require a lot more conscious effort, and they're not something that our brains are sort of inherently wired for.
Right. It's not that instinctual, sort of.
It takes work.
Yeah.
And this is where CLT becomes really important because it focuses on managing those limitations of our working memory,
Right.
which is really critical when we're dealing with this secondary knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
the stuff that doesn't come naturally to us.
Okay.
So Sweller and others argue that primary knowledge acquisition
Mm-hmm.
puts far less strain on our working memory
Right.
because we have these ingrained biological mechanisms to support it.
Yeah.
But it's in the realm of secondary knowledge,
Okay.
where the limited capacity of working memory becomes a real bottleneck.
Gotcha.
And that's where these instructional design principles of CLT,
Right.
like minimizing extraneous load, maximizing germane load,
Mm-hmm.
becomes so important for effective learning.
So essentially, with primary knowledge, it's almost like evolution has already done a lot of the heavy lifting for us. So we don't need to worry too much about, the cognitive load aspect.
It's more efficient. It's more streamlined.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But when we're dealing with these newer, more complex things,
Yes.
that's when CLT really comes into play.
Exactly.
Okay, now you mentioned Sweller applying these evolutionary principles to creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And I was particularly intrigued by that randomness as genesis idea.
Yeah.
So how does CLT help us understand something that seems as kind of unpredictable as creativity?
Well, Swaller suggests that when we encounter a truly novel problem,
Mm-hmm.
one where we don't have those pre-existing schemas to guide us.
Right. We're kind of in uncharted territory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Our initial approach often resembles this kind of random generate and test strategy.
Okay.
We draw upon the knowledge we have,
Mm-hmm.
we combine it in different ways, perhaps somewhat randomly at first,
Okay.
and then we evaluate whether those combinations offer a potential solution.
So it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall
Yeah,
and seeing what sticks to it.
But of course, the effectiveness of this really relies on
Right.
the breadth and depth of our existing knowledge base.
Right. If you only have like 3 noodles to throw, it's
Exactly.
going to work very well.
If you don't have a rich enough foundation to draw from, those random combinations are unlikely to be very fruitful.
Okay, so the takeaway here isn't just that, randomness or random ideas can be a starting point,
Yeah,
but that having that rich foundation of knowledge is crucial
absolutely.
for those random ideas to actually be useful.
It's the raw material
Yeah.
for those creative leaps.
Okay, and Sweller even uses this to explain why brainstorming can be effective,
Right.
right, from a CLT perspective.
So the idea is that by encouraging this, this high volume of diverse ideas
Uh-huh.
based on the group's collective knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
they might stumble upon novel solutions
Yeah.
without getting bogged down in a more, working memory intensive approach.
Okay.
Like, systematically working backward from a desired outcome,
Uh-huh.
which is that means ends analysis heuristic where you're constantly comparing your current state
Mm-hmm.
to the goal state.
Right, very deliberate.
Very deliberate.
Yeah.
And that can create a lot of extraneous load.
Right. So brainstorming can kind of bypass some of that.
It can free us up to explore those more random combinations.
So CLT offers this potential cognitive explanation for why a technique like brainstorming,
Yeah,
which seems a bit chaotic on the surface, can
Uh-huh.
actually be quite productive.
exactly. It's not just about coming up with crazy ideas.
Right.
It's about tapping into that collective knowledge base
And having the space to sort of play around with it.
and avoiding that cognitive overload.
Gotcha. Okay, moving on. Another interdisciplinary link is with the mirror neuron system.
Right.
And this is a system in our brains that
Mhm.
when we see someone do something,
Hmm.
these neurons fire as if we were doing it ourselves.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
So how does this connect with CLT and how we design instruction?
Well, building on both Geary and Sweller's work, the core idea here is that humans are fundamentally wired
Yeah.
to learn through observation and imitation.
Mm-hmm. We see it all the time.
Right.
Exactly. Especially in young children, but even as adults.
Yeah, we're constantly picking up cues from others
Mm-hmm.
and incorporating them into our own behavior.
Okay.
So when we see someone perform an action,
Uh-huh.
our brains have this network, the mirror neuron system,
Right.
that becomes active both when we watch the action
Mm-hmm.
and when we ourselves perform that same action.
So there's this kind of like mirroring happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is thought to be particularly important for understanding and replicating that biologically primary knowledge we were talking about earlier.
Right. The things that are kind of like
The things that are ingrained in our evolutionary history.
right. Instinctual.
Right.
Mhm.
And Van Gogh and his colleagues
Okay.
proposed this really interesting idea.
Uh-huh.
They suggest that the mirror neuron system can help explain why animations showing human movement
Okay.
might actually be more effective for learning certain skills than static diagrams.
Okay.
And this is interesting because,
Yeah.
the research on the benefits of animation and learning
Mm-hmm.
has been somewhat mixed.
Right. So sometimes they seem to help, and sometimes it's not really clear if they make a difference, or sometimes they can even be worse.
Yeah.
And the common explanation for why they might fail
Mm-hmm.
is that all of that moving information
Right.
might overload our working memory,
Exactly.
especially that transient information that disappears before we can fully process it.
Right. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose.
Yeah.
There's just too much coming at us too quickly.
Okay, so how does the mirror neuron system fit into all of this?
Well, Van Gogh et al. Argue that if an animation depicts human movement,
Okay.
the mirror neuron system actually steps in
Okay.
and allows us to process that dynamic information
Mm-hmm.
more effortlessly. Because we've evolved to understand and predict human actions,
Mm-hmm.
our working memory isn't taxed as heavily.
So it's like our brains have a more efficient pathway
Yes,
for
we're pre-wired for it.
Yeah, those kinds of actions.
Right.
Okay, and this is supported by a meta-analysis,
Mhm.
which is a study that combines the results of many other studies,
Right.
which found that animations are most effective when teaching procedural motor skills,
Right.
which are things that involve, physical movements.
Exactly.
So it's like our brains just get it
Uh-huh.
when we see those kinds of things.
It's like we're automatically simulating those actions in our own minds.
Yeah, it makes intuitive sense, right?
Like us.
It's like we have this shortcut
Yeah.
for understanding actions that are fundamental to human experience.
Exactly.
Okay, so next we have cognitive brain research informing CLT.
Mm-hmm.
And Kirshner and colleagues have done some really interesting work looking at how cognitive brain research can help us understand why collaborative learning
Mm-hmm.
is sometimes more effective than individual learning,
Right.
and why the findings in this area have been so varied.
Because, it's not always a clear win for groups.
Right.
Sometimes individuals seem to learn just as well or even better.
Exactly. So what's going on there?
Well, research on how our brain hemispheres interact
Okay.
suggests that for really complex tasks,
Uh-huh.
our brain can actually increase its processing capacity
Okay.
by distributing the workload between the left and right hemispheres.
Oh, interesting. So instead of just relying on one,
Instead of just relying on
you
one,
split it up.
you split it up.
Okay.
And as the complexity of the task increases,
Mm-hmm.
this division of labor becomes more and more beneficial.
So it's like having two processors in a computer working together in a
Thanks to nothing.
demanding task.
Right? They can handle more work collectively
Yeah.
than one working alone.
Okay, so they're suggesting a parallel between this kind of interhemispheric processing
Right.
and how cognitive effort is distributed in collaborative learning.
Precisely.
Okay.
Their hypothesis is that when faced with tasks that impose a high cognitive load,
Mhm.
a group can actually distribute that load among its members,
Okay.
effectively pooling their working memory resources.
So they're kind of sharing the burden.
Yeah, they're sharing the burden,
Uh-huh.
and this is something that a single individual might not be able to do.
Oh, right. They just don't have the capacity.
They hit that limit.
Yeah.
So while a single brain might be sufficient
Yep.
for tasks with low cognitive demands,
Uh-huh.
groups gain a significant advantage
Yeah.
when that task is complex
Okay.
and really pushes the limits of individual working memory.
So it's like, when you're trying to solve a really difficult problem, sometimes just having another person there to bounce ideas off of or to kind of...
To help process.
Yeah, to share that load can make a huge difference.
Right.
Okay, that's a really interesting way to frame the benefits of teamwork. It's not just about, sharing knowledge. It's also about kind of distributing the mental effort required to process that information.
That's a cognitive collaboration.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, now, the last of these interdisciplinary approaches is the philosophy of science.
Right.
And I have to admit, this sounds like a very different lens to apply to CLT.
It is, but it's a fascinating one.
Oh, tell me about it.
So Geigetz and colleagues approached CLT from a philosophical perspective.
Okay.
Specifically using the methodologies of Karl Popper and Joseph Sneed to examine its foundations as a scientific theory.
So they're kind of putting it under the microscope.
Exactly. They're saying, okay, how does CLT hold up
Right.
under these rigorous standards of scientific inquiry?
Okay, and what did they find?
Well, according to Popper's criterion of falsifiability, which is the idea that a scientific theory must be capable of being proven wrong through empirical testing.
You got to be able to test.
You got to be able to test it.
Yeah.
Geigetz et al. Argue that CLT faces some challenges.
Okay.
And the core issue they raise is this assumption of three distinct types of cognitive load.
Right. Intrinsic, extraneous, and germane.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they contend that these haven't yet been definitively validated as separate and independently measurable constructs.
So because we can't easily isolate and measure these three loads as distinct things, Popper might argue that CLT in its current form isn't truly falsifiable and therefore not a true scientific theory.
That's the essence of their Popperian critique.
Okay.
But they also examine CLT through the lens of Sneed's structuralist view of scientific theories.
So a different perspective.
A different perspective.
Yeah.
So Sneed argued that the fundamental assumptions of a theory don't necessarily need direct empirical validation. Instead, they function more like foundational axioms.
So they're kind of like the starting point.
They're the building blocks upon which the theory is built.
Okay.
And the focus then shifts to the testability and the empirical support for the specific hypotheses and applications that are derived from this network of core assumptions.
So from Sneed's viewpoint, it's more about the practical utility and the ability to test the predictions and the applications that stem from CLT.
Exactly.
Rather than needing to prove the independent existence of those three types of load.
It's about what the theory can do.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the absolute truth of its underlying components.
Okay.
And Geigetz et al. Use this perspective to suggest a future direction for CLT research.
Okay, so where should we go from here?
Well, they advocate for refining the theory by integrating it with more specific and detailed theoretical models, like cognitive task analysis.
Which breaks down the steps involved in a task. Yeah. Exactly. And also developing more precise and reliable ways to measure each of the three types of cognitive load.
So even if we can't definitively prove that they exist as completely separate entities, we can still try to measure them.
We can still try to understand how they interact and influence learning.
And they even mentioned a study by Cerniak and colleagues as an example of this kind of work.
Right. So in this study, they attempted to measure the three loads individually. And they found that the split attention effect, which is where learning suffers when related information is presented separately.
So like if you have the text on one page and the diagram on another.
Exactly. Yeah. They found that this wasn't solely due to increased extraneous load, but it also had implications for germane load.
So it's more nuanced than just saying...
It's more nuanced than just saying, oh, we need to reduce extraneous load.
Right. It's about understanding...
It's about how these different loads...
The interplay between them interact and how they impact learning.
And that can lead to a more sophisticated understanding of why certain instructional methods are effective or ineffective.
So we can be more targeted in our approach.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a fascinating overview of how CLT is being examined through these different disciplinary lenses. Now, let's turn to the interdisciplinary research. Where we see how CLT is being integrated with other learning theories within educational psychology itself. And the first area is self-directed learning. Particularly its connection with the four-component instructional design model, or 4CID.
So Van Marienborn Sleismans highlight that there's significant overlap between CLT and 4CID, particularly in their shared recognition of the crucial role of managing intrinsic, extraneous, and germane load.
Right, so that's common ground.
Common ground.
Yeah.
But they also point out that historically,
4CID has been more focused on designing comprehensive educational programs for these, complex skills, whereas CLT has often been applied to the design of specific instructional materials or tasks.
Right. So 4CID is kind of bigger picture, thinking about the whole program.
The whole program, whole curriculum.
Yeah.
Whereas CLT has been more about, specific lessons or activities.
Right. And as we talked about earlier, 4CID also tends to emphasize learning in realistic, real-world contexts with complex learning tasks that align with the demands of lifelong learning.
Right. It's about preparing people for the messy real world.
Exactly.
Not just for passing a test.
Whereas a lot of that original CLT research utilized more controlled, somewhat artificial tasks.
In laboratory settings.
Right. So more kind of sterile environments.
Exactly.
So how do they bridge this gap?
Well, Van Marienborn and Sleismans start with the understanding that these rich, authentic learning tasks, which are so central to self-directed learning, inherently impose a high level of cognitive load.
Yeah, because they're so complex.
So they're complex, they're multifaceted, and they involve a lot of different cognitive processes.
So the challenge is to design those learning environments using the principles of 4CID in a way that effectively manages this load, while also fostering those self-regulation skills.
Right.
Things like, planning, monitoring, and evaluating your own learning.
Exactly. Metacognitive skills.
Right. So how do they do that? How do those principles of 4CID help to manage that cognitive load?
Well, they essentially map those core elements of 4CID. Things like the use of whole learning tasks, the provision of supportive scaffolding, and the systematic variation of tasks directly onto strategies for managing cognitive load and promoting self-regulation.
So it's about finding the right balance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, for example, engaging learners with whole meaningful tasks helps them develop integrated skills.
Right.
But it also requires them to engage in self-assessment and make decisions about future learning activities.
So that adds to the cognitive load.
Right.
Yeah.
So to address this, they emphasize the use of scaffolding techniques. Like gradually reducing the level of guidance provided as learners become more competent.
So you're kind of fading out that support.
Yeah, you're fading out that support.
As they need it less.
Right.
Okay.
And that helps to manage both the intrinsic load of the task and any extraneous load that might arise from its complexity.
Okay. And how about specifically encouraging that germane load?
Yeah.
The deep processing that leads to real understanding?
Well, they suggest incorporating strategies that prompt learners to actively think about their own learning process.
Yeah.
So this could involve using different types of assessment that require learners to explain their reasoning.
So not just multiple choice or fill in the blank?
Right. It's about getting them to articulate their thinking.
Yeah.
And they also suggest incorporating self-explanation prompts that encourage them to reflect on why they succeeded or struggled with a particular task.
So getting them to kind of analyze their own performance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to foster task selection skills.
Okay.
They propose using peer assessment and clearly defined performance standards to help learners make informed choices about which tasks to pursue next.
So they're not just randomly picking.
Right. They have a framework for making those decisions.
And again, that encourages them to think more deeply about their choices.
And to justify their choices.
Yeah.
Which leads to deeper processing.
Okay, so the underlying principle here is really about empowering learners to be active participants in managing their own cognitive load and directing their own learning.
It's about giving them the tools and the strategies to become self-regulated learners.
And that's a really thoughtful integration, right? It's leveraging those design principles of 4CID to create these engaging and complex learning experiences while strategically applying CLT to make sure that the cognitive demands are manageable and actually contribute to the development of those self-directed learning skills.
It's a powerful combination.
Okay, finally, let's explore how Renkel and colleagues are extending CLT principles to the learning of heuristics using worked examples.
Okay, so this is interesting because, most of the research on worked examples, which, involve showing learners step-by-step solutions to problems, has primarily focused on algorithmic learning. In domains like, mathematics and science, where there's a very clear sequence of procedures to follow.
So like a recipe.
Like a recipe.
Yeah.
You just follow the steps and you get the right answer.
Yeah.
But there's a growing interest in applying these principles of worked examples.
Okay.